Exactly, especially if you're not retired.
There you go. Oh, great. Here's Isaac. We'll let a few more folks in. Good. Oh, well, happy Thursday afternoon to you all. Hope all is doing well. Welcome to this third Thursday conversation. This feels like one that is helpful for new ministry developers, but honestly, for church leaders of any kind, shape, size, all over God's kingdom. And this came about. David Perkins is a good friend of mine, has been for years, friend and mentor, fellow church planter when he was in Virginia, has been many times over, maybe too many times over, interim rector, coaches some of our church planters, and we were talking about this concept of anger in the church, but maybe specifically the anger that arises in new ministry settings. I don't think I said this to you, David, and I don't think I'm oversharing here to tell you all that when I was church planting, that was a moment where I realized I needed some really good spiritual direction and a really good therapist. And I recall going to the therapist and anger being just really the presenting issue. I need somebody to talk through with. And so Dave and I thought we'd offer a couple of sessions on these third Thursdays on that anger, how each of us as individuals tends to respond to it, some maybe healthier ways of directing it, and how it specifically can show up in new missional and new church planting settings, especially in this moment in the 21st century church that we find ourselves in. So I'm going to cease my introduction, David, and turn it over to you a little bit. Now, I know you want this to be a bit of a conversation, so I think that's
absolutely
the invitation to you all is to please jump in, use the chat box, unmute.
Absolutely.
Let's make this a discussion.
Yeah, I thank you, Katie. I had an experience in my last interim. I was serving at Christ Episcopal Church in Valdosta, Georgia. The bishop of that diocese, Frank Logue, is also a church planter, and our friendship goes way back, like mine with Katie, go back to years we were both planting churches in Georgia and Virginia. And I was in the nave at the church one evening with a layperson, a skilled carpenter, and we were doing some work in the nave, and the last presidential election came up. And he started I didn't know him very well at that time. I came to know him much better, of course, over the 16 months of the interim, but he launched into this diatribe about how the election was stolen. And when he caught his breath, I simply interjected a couple of facts. There's no such thing as an alternative fact. It's either a fact or it's not. Well, the governor of Georgia, conservative Republican, the attorney general, a conservative Republican, said there was no fraud in the election, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he waved it off. Oh, they had to say that, and went on. And I was internally beginning to boil. And I said to him, Paul, you and I are brothers, and I need to ask you that we take this item off our agenda for conversation. We can talk about the weather, we can talk about politics, we can talk about theology, but we're not going to be able to talk about the last election. And he picked it up again, and I interrupted him the second time and said, I need you to understand that if this persists, I'm going to get angry with you, and you're going to see a side of me that you really don't want to see. My perception is that you are committed to a perspective you're trying to convert me to, and that facts You seem to be waving off the facts. So my response to that is going to get angry and really uncivil if we continue. So as my brother, I need to ask you that we take this item. We will never have a conversation about this particular thing again. And he agreed. And we went on to have a very positive and pleasant relationship for the duration of my time there, but we never talked about that again. What that did is it took me back to the beginnings of my pastoral ministry after earning my doctorate in New Testament and Greek from a Baptist seminary and going to a church in the East Kentucky Mountains, First Baptist, Williamsburg, Kentucky, a college town with a Baptist college and a Sunday attendance in the mid to high 200s. I was 31 years old, and I knew I had jumped into the deep end of the pool and that I didn't have adequate skills for being interpersonally real. So I took a couple of steps. One, I went on a 2-week retreat with some other clergy and some group facilitators and did some work on my family of origins issues. My dad being an alcoholic and a rager when he was drunk. And as a result of that, he and I were reconciled as a result of that 2-week time. And I stumbled into a little book by a Mennonite pastoral counselor who finished his teaching career at Fuller and retired several years ago, David Augsburger. It was in that pastoral care and counseling series that Fortress published back in those days, Anger and Assertiveness in Pastoral Care, and it was about 90 pages. That little book saved my life in terms of helping me create strategies for being real in community about my emotions in a way that was not wounding to people. The East Kentucky Mountain people, as the governor of Kentucky at that time said, have a level-eyed directness and sincerity about them. And I had to learn to be real, or else I knew I was going to get waved off as someone who just wasn't real. So I used his strategies and I practiced on the people. In fact, I'm going back up there next month for a few days to waterfall hike, and I will see some of those parishioners. It goes back to the late 70s, early 80s, and I have to confess to one person who's still living that I practiced on him. So what that experience in Valdosta did is it took me back through my journey, and it made me realize that in these days when we're so polarized as the church, that clergy anger management becomes even more important. So I've had conversations with Katie and Tom Brackett and Frank, my bishop, about how we can together maybe share a little bit about this and our journeys and work on our strategies. So Katie has agreed that we would do this for a couple of months. And I thought we might start out by simply asking you to speak up about how this issue affects you and your ministry. And I'm going to mute for a second. Does this mean you never get mad?
For me, it's almost, there's so many different circumstances which anger presents itself. I struggle to name one specifically.
Yes, Susanna, please.
Hi, I'm so actually just so delighted, Katie and David, that you're putting this together, because I think that that we find ourselves unexpectedly in places, a little bit like your experience in the nave, and all of a sudden you're in that moment and you know that you have to respond in a Christ-like way, and and you're out of your depth. It's such a real thing for all of us, whether it's related to the church planting work that we may be involved in, or just in our interactions with other members of our parish. And I always, something that I've been kind of on my learning curve recently is this connection between anger and shame, and how when we go to that shame-based response, either for ourselves or the desire to, shame someone else in our anger, that unpacking that has been really critically important. And it comes back a bit to what you said, David. There's probably family of origin issues in that response, but it's recognizing that we can be angry and not sin. But if we go to that place where we're operating out of our own shame, or we are forcing that other person with whom we are angry to be shamed, if we're shaming them, then we're already in the weeds at that point in time. So
Yeah.
how we build better skills around that is something that I always want to hear more about.
As I've listened to you talk about that, both my parents were alcoholics, which is, of course, addiction is a shame-based struggle.
Right.
And they had another addiction that they shared that we observed as children, and that addiction was to anger, because they felt less than competent about life. So when something confronted them that challenged them, they would get angry. And the anger was a mood changer. It would help to dissipate the anxiety about being unable to meet a challenge. And that one, I had worked on reconciliation issues years before, but that particular insight came a little bit later in life for me, when I was having a real mean conversation with myself about about an icy day in Virginia where I backed off the driveway and broke a tail light. And then I realized, you don't need to talk to yourself like this. That's what your parents did. That's how they changed their mood when they were frustrated. You don't need that strategy.
Yeah.
So family of origin stuff can be a piece, and is a piece of it, obviously.
There's this bit in mission development too. Anytime you're trying to start something new, but whether that's a church plant or it's a new ministry in an existing congregation, or some kind of redevelopment, there's a spectrum, but in many cases the stakes feel really high. It can feel like a really high pressure. We've got to build, we've got to achieve, we've got to save the declining Episcopal Church single-handedly. We've got to make our bishop proud. I've got to make this succeed, or I'll never get another job. And it's like in those really stressful situations, high pressure situations, that the basements of our gifts begin to come out. Or if you're an Enneagram person, the shadow side, or the deconstructed side begins to come out. I found that with conversations with my diocese, conversations with my core team, conversations with myself, especially when I was church planting under that pressure.
Whoever that was, hi, this is Biff. I'm on the road back up into the mountains, so I apologize. I'm not on Zoom, but
well, you're going to a good place.
Whoever that was needs to stop reading my thoughts. But actually, the question I have is, I think we've been so ingrained to think that the minister's job is to basically be a therapy dog, that we're bereft of human emotions. And so many of us have trained ourselves not to feel anger, and all we do is bottle it up. And it comes out, of course, in unexpected ways.
Right.
So what would you say is a good strategy for allowing ourselves to feel anger? And I think that there are times that we have a sense to righteous anger or righteous upset. There are things that should upset and anger us. What
Right.
do you think for those of us who have been sort of programmed to think that we're not supposed to have those thoughts?
I think you read my diary too, actually. Um, so what I have done in preparation for today and for next month, and I'm reluctant to do this very much on Zoom because Zoom in itself is a visually overstimulating medium. But I prepared a PowerPoint, and there are a few places where I'll stick it up on the screen. And I think in response to your question, William, I'm going to do that, and I'll read it to you since you are on the road. Let me go to slideshow mode here. Come on, do my thing. There we go. Oh, come on, slideshow. You know, Zoom has got, every time they redo this, it gets more complicated. Okay, I'll play the game. All right. You can see it even if it's not in slideshow mode. I'm not going to waste any more time on that.
Yeah, no, we can see it.
Okay. There's a quote in Augsburger's book in the early stages. The sanctions against open recognition of anger and other negative emotions lead many pastors to internalize their frustrations and present a habitual nice guy, nice gal front to their parishioners. That's your therapy dog image, which I love, actually. And the picture I picked for that is a boiling pot with a lid on. You know, the steam is in there. You're just trying to keep it not from squirting out around the edges. And we have been programmed in the church for centuries around what I would call, and what Augsburger calls, a dichotomous view of emotion, that there are such things as bad feelings and such things as good feelings. And a bad feeling, anger, and a good feeling, kindness, or a bad feeling, jealousy, a good feeling, appreciation, a bad feeling, pride, a good feeling, humility, a bad feeling, fear, a good feeling, courage. And the answer to that sort of dichotomy is that it's just wrong. Some years back, and I'm going to skip a slide here, a psychiatrist named Robert Plutchik came up with what he called the emotion wheel, where there were 8 feelings, 8 core emotions, and then other emotions that rooted out of that. And then emotions in combination led to certain tertiary feelings. But the basic idea is the holistic understanding that there's no such thing as a good or a bad feeling. I think this old proverb goes back to Martin Luther, that you cannot prevent a bird from flying over your head, but you can prevent it from building a nest in your hair. The idea being that the feeling just happens. And as Augsburger puts it, the central issue is not whether one experiences negative emotions, but how. Not if one dare become angry, but in what way. There are no good or bad feelings. Feelings simply are. Moral choice begins with the experiencing of feelings, not with the experiencing of feelings, but with their expression. Now I'm going to take it off share for now, so you won't have to keep looking at that. Stop sharing. There we go. So I'm just would stop at that point and ask how you're responding to that. And I see from Katie's text, there's several versions of the feeling wheel out there. I think I have the one you mentioned also in the chat box. Let's see here. So feel free to respond here. I'm going to mute myself and just listen about your own background. What have you heard about, as William said, the idea that we're supposed to be therapy dogs? And what's the conditioning and the messaging that you've been getting? And I'm very aware that there are all sorts of differences in conditioning this, like gender, and we're going to get into that. today and next week, but feel free to chime in, please, in chat or just speak.
Well, I've done a lot of, I'm Claire Woodley, I'm from the Diocese of Long Island. Sorry, I'm late. I've done a lot of after pastorates for both sexual and financial misconduct occurrences and a number of interims. And anger is something that I had to get a beat on pretty quick, because there was a lot of situations that I was in where people had some really just egregious behavior. An old mentor of mine suggested that anybody who knows me knows I'm going to say Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 24, be angry, but don't sin. And she told me that anger is the power to break through oppression. And it is, it's a God-given emotion. It's part of the whole, it's part of the wheel. It's just there. It's part of and that your emotional life is a data stream in the same way that you can, have numbers data, like how many people are in your area and all that kind of, your emotions are a data stream. And you don't have to be highly trained in transference and countertransference. But you do need to be aware of what your feelings are. And then when you have, when you've got anger, ask yourself, what's the source? Where's it coming from? And how do you want to use this power in the moment? What is the goal that you want to have? So it's, if I had to say, there's the thing that I want my anger to be in tandem with is self-control. So it ain't about me so much as about getting done what needs to get done. Because if it becomes about me, then I just have a big mess to clean up. So using that as a kind of the rails of it's data, it's look at what the feeling's about, and what's my goal with the anger. But that does not happen overnight. I'm at this 35 years now, and God knows I don't get it right all the time, but just that was really helpful to me in learning how to manage the power of anger and not sit on it.
Katie and I were talking about this yesterday, that as you put it, it's a learning curve and a journey. And most of what I've learned in this area, I've learned because I screwed up. This is one place where, failure is a great teacher. In retrospect, you look back and say, damn, I could have done that differently,
Perfection is a trick of the devil.
Actually, in Augsburger's little book, there's a long discussion of the tyranny of perfection. Yeah.
David, are you ready for an example of a time?
I would love. I was hoping you were going to share. I wondered if it's the one you were telling me about.
I would love to repeat the story that I told you about a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, I think this has been an incident in my church planting that I've reflected on a good bit as I've learned more about, I guess, more constructive ways of living out anger. And I've just been processing for several years and said that I would offer here. We had many sit down, come to Jesus conversations with my bishop and various members of his staff over the 4 years that we ran our coffee shop church. Come to Jesus moments, because the coffee shop church, while the ministry was amazing and beautiful, the finances were always teetering on the edge of scary. And we just hadn't had very good conversations, like at the outset, about covenanting around how we would address money and sustainability and what would happen if we got to the end of the 3 years of funding and still couldn't pay the bills. And so I walked into one of these conversations. It's probably 3 years into the project, hoping to have a heart-to-heart with my bishop. And I had brought some lay leaders with me, actually our deacon and a couple of lay leaders with me to the church, to really say, hey, we're not self-sustaining. Hate to admit it, but we're not. And we need your pastoral advice on how to proceed forward. And I don't think that the bishop understood that that was the purpose with which we were coming to see him. And so he had invited another unnamed member of his staff to be present for that conversation, who I'd had some trouble with in the past, just communication trouble, personality trouble. And this staff member halfway through started saying, all you guys want is money and you're not taking responsibility for your own failure. He started pounding his fists on the table. And then this is what got under my skin. He said, well, maybe we should have chosen somebody else to be the church planter. And that's when, I'm like outwardly like a very calm person. And maybe that's like part of being like an Asian American female. I feel like that's the persona I'm supposed to present: calm, good listener. But man, he struck me the wrong way. And I like stood up, put my hands on the table and started shouting at him, maybe you should have chosen another church planter and you should try doing this yourself. And as you can imagine, that the rest of that conversation went nowhere. We did not get the funding that we needed. We did not have the conversation. We didn't have the productivity that we really needed out of that heart-to-heart with our bishop. And David, and my lay people came out. Some of them came out and said, oh my God, Katie, now we want to fight for you and defend you. Which I didn't want. I didn't want them to have that idea, right? That I was under attack. And then some others said, man, you really let him get under your skin. And it diminished, so for others, it sort of diminished my leadership. So I kind of think about that incident over and over as what could I have done instead, David? It might have been a moment where I wish I had had the ability to stop, self-differentiate and say, I'm going to need a 5-minute breather before we continue this conversation. Or, it feels like maybe we should come back in a few weeks, maybe with some kind of covenant of norms of how this conversation will proceed. But yeah, I'd say I learned a lot about myself and the mistake that I made in that space around anger.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that story, and I had to chuckle about it. I had the experience. We were launching the new church in Richmond, and we were just before going public, we were doing direct mail to 15,000 families. And I got a phone call from a neighboring Episcopal priest who was 8 or 9 miles away. You're trying to take our members these direct mails, and I blew up. And I said to him, Bill, first of all, we don't want your people. They're too traditional. And if you were a little more secure and more committed to the gospel, you wouldn't be worried about me stealing your sheep. You'd be out making your own. I mean, I laid it to him. And I hung up the phone and realized, all right, you just screwed up, So I called the dean of our convocation, who also was a great mission developer who had done a wonderful job of redeveloping a parish. I said, Sue, I think you and I need to have a meeting with Bill. I just scorched his underwear on the phone. So we did have a meeting, and I said to him, I need you to understand, I'm not taking back my basic assertion, but I'm apologizing for having blown you away with my response. That was not my best day as a mission developer, to say the least.
Yeah.
too that the people we lash out at the most in anger are those closest to us. When we're under stress, when we're, feeling attacked or vulnerable. And just today, I have a very dear friend, colleague who has been sort of drifting into some pretty unhealthy spaces. And we had a brief interaction which led to antagonizing, and then I probably was more curt than I needed to be. And it's just so providential that we're having this conversation 15 minutes afterwards. And so, has anyone else experienced that? Is it the people that you're, closest to or you interact with that can ignite that anger?
Biff, I know you can't see it, but you're getting lots of head nods.
And I see Jen has her hand up. Please go ahead.
Oh yeah, and absolutely. The people you're closest to, the people that you feel should have the tightest grip on what it is you're trying to do and trying to accomplish. So you look to them to understand what you're trying to do, and then when they don't, it's really, really frustrating. And I even just recently I had a conversation with someone where they looked at me and said that they it wasn't really their style, but they kind of wondered if maybe I was experiencing spiritual warfare and Satan was trying to stop my ministry, and I lost it. So because it was so unexpected, and really I was like, no, you're trying to blame spiritual warfare for something you need to be accountable for in our relationship. But yeah, but when it's the people that do have power over your life too, but that you really care for and you expect something different from, I think that's the kind of person that just sucks all the wind out of my sails and can send me off into just a complete tailspin in a whirlpool of anger.
One of the ways in which Augsburger helped me in my practice, practicing with people early on, was to separate my emotions from the way I chose to express them, not to allow my emotions to overcome my will, to detach and process. And as Katie put it, take a time out. There have been times when I've had to say, when I could feel my inner pot starting to boil, can we suspend this conversation for now and come back, pick it up in a few days? I need to think about this and process. Really, what the truth is, I need to get my anger in hand before we continue. And sometimes for me, it's writing it out in my journal or in the morning pages when I first get up, processing, planning a conversation ahead of time that I know is going to be unpleasant. But that key thing of finding a strategy that works for you to separate your emotion from your choice to express it. Otherwise, you're just venting. And if it's like the old idea that your boss chewed you out, so you go home and kick the dog. So sometimes the anger you're expressing to those closest to you is being displaced from where it was generated, so to speak. And one of the things that Katie and I talked about, and I'm going to put the slideshow back up for a second and take it off, is the unique challenge of mission developer anger and the places where you experience it. I see it in the chat. I don't want to miss that. New wine bursts old wineskins. That's a truth. And that's a lot of what happens in mission development. So let me screen share again here, and we'll kick this conversation another step down the road. So that unique challenge of a mission developer's anger and the context, jumped one there, go back, in which it occurs. And the first context that occurred to me is your adjudicatory in Katie's story. Dealing with people in your context that you're accountable to who just don't get it. and I'm just gonna run through these and we'll come back and discuss. Anger inside your launch team or core group, and working with those people as you're trying to form community, or with your larger church itself, or with your context, like my confrontation with the neighboring rector who was threatened that a new church was going up in his area. And goodness, there could be others, obviously, which is what we're going to talk about here. So let me take this off and come on, mouse, cooperate. And ask if you would like to kick in some of this, how you're experiencing this, either in your judicatory or in your launch team or core group or your context.
I can also edit this video or not post this video. I'd rather we have the space to say these things than post the video.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
we just
feel safe.
Yeah.
And one of the critical issues here for mission developers, when you're new in something and you're starting something and you don't know that many people in your region, is having a safe place to go with it. You might have an example you'd share with us, or just a story you would share.
I could share something.
Please.
I'm just gonna trust, which means not knowing what.
This is a safe space.
Well, rather than saying that, I'm gonna trust, not because you say it's a safe space, but I'm gonna trust.
Good.
Because it's not really safe, but that's okay. Trust me on that. It's better that we be bold than safe. So in Abundant Life's community, we are, one thing I'm noticing, we're intentionally bilingual, and I'm often called on to interpret. And as I'm in that kind of bridge, I'm having all sorts of anger, emotions about what people are like, and the act of having to interpret means I'm putting feelings away and like really like needing to find a better way of processing my emotions based on the fact that I'm not even just observing. So that's one thing I'm noticing as we're talking, which has been really helpful to our team.
Good.
That I'm not even able to have my emotions properly in the moment because I'm trying to be a bridge. Thinking we have a lot of people different, so in poverty and in situations of domestic violence, but also just have had some rough times. So a lot of people show up angry just by skin-like, and really need a place where they can express their anger, and the expressing of that anger can create more anger among them. Because so one of our members came in and said, just wanted to talk about how she'd gone to a church. Her husband is Black, she is white. They went to a church he wanted to go to, and she wanted to talk about how a lot of the people that welcomed them at the door told her she was a crack addict and she was too skinny. Skinny can't be normal. You need to get yourself help. You got you got demons in you. And she recounted this story and said, racism isn't just white people being racist against Black people. Black people are racist too. And was looking directly at our Black interns, our college student interns, when she said that, and said, well, I'm not talking about you, but I could, because I wasn't translating at the moment, I was watching the shifting energies in the room and noting that the person who was speaking and telling the story was feeling very hurt and judged, and was also trying to tell us about how unsafe she felt with her husband, but was only in the beginning stages of being able to say it out loud, that in the home and elsewhere he was putting her in unsafe situations. I didn't, so we, so what I found a way of saying, I hear how hurt you are and how angry that must have made you feel. I have to admit, I'm starting to feel a little angry too. And I wonder if some others in the room might be feeling angry for different reasons. And maybe they've had a similar experience, or maybe something you said. And then it descended into some other things. And that sort of thing happens fairly frequently in our gathering, in our community, where we're bringing a lot of anger from our daily life because of the way we're treated. A lot of folks are treated poorly for just all sorts of reasons, and it bumps into other folks' anger. In the process of trying to bring it to light, we hurt each other. We instigate more anger. I noted that the students who in particular were pretty offended by being felt singled out, even though there were other Black folks in the room. She really looked at them. Found a way to organize together. One of them who felt comfortable approached her first to kind of say how that incident affected her. And so it was a playing out, and that's good in community. But just bringing this up makes me realize how often anger is not even very far from the surface. And in the process of trying to support each other and be a place of healing, more hurt is caused. And I notice when I'm interpreting it, when that's part of my role on a given evening, I have a harder time seeing people's emotions and seeing the currents in the room, but I'm also pushing things down, and they come out in funky ways, like days later. And I'm like, where the hell did that come from? I'll stop there, but that's what I'm mulling over right now. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
And thank you for sharing that. And the relationship between how I process my feelings in the community and how the people process theirs, it's all interconnected. And one of Augsburger's, the last chapter in his little book, is about how developing and honing your skills at being real in community with your feelings in a way that's affirming and yet real will help the community to develop its own skills. It's a modeling practice in a new community. How do we as a community process our emotions? And the person who sets the pace for that basically is the mission developer. It's a learning process. I had times when I had to go back to my launch team and say, all right, I screwed up. We're going to learn. What can we learn from this? There was a better way to process this. Katie, what's our cutoff time today?
2 o'clock your time, 2 o'clock.
Okay.
East.
Okay. What I'd like to do to set the stage for next month, if you will allow me to, is to do a quick introduction to Augsburger's approach to this. And I want to have some time for discussion and then ask you to think about doing some homework. Let's see, so and text here. I'm catching up with the chat a little bit. Oh yeah.
Can I throw in one thing? That your
please.
response of humility and saying I screwed up is one of those actions that you can take where in people who are really looking to do this work together, it creates a grace margin. Use Eric Law's phrase. It creates a grace margin where other people will also take risk and be vulnerable.
That's the hope. Yes.
And that in doing that, it's one of those beautiful places where the transformation happened. And what had been something that was blowing things up prior to this is something that helps consolidate the group.
Right. Let me do a quick, hope maybe 3-minute scoon through this, and we'll look ahead to next week. So we'll go back to screen share for a moment. And we'll go to slideshow. Augsburger's model of what he calls assertive affirmative expression of anger. He has three basic strategies. The first is what he calls a non-assertive, passive, and superficially patient way to deal with anger, which is basically flight. The second is more aggressive, where you're claiming and demanding, and it's the fight mode, which I'm very familiar with. And the third is what he calls assertive, where you face differences respectfully, you're real, and you verbalize yourself in a way that's affirming and respectful, but real. And I have an example from his book that I wanted to share with you really quickly to illustrate. Your paycheck is late. And one answer would possibly be to say to the treasurer, Sam, I'm calling to ask why you're holding up my paycheck. This is the fourth time you've been delinquent. I'm reporting this to the finance committee. It's time you got the system working a little better. That's a fight response, aggressive. Sam, I'm sure you just overlooked getting my salary check to me on time. I hate to inconvenience you. Could I drop by and pick it up? That's non-assertive, passive, and superficially patient. Sam, I'm calling to request my check before the bank closes at 4 today. We're a few days past the scheduled payday, so I'm hoping you can have it ready for in the next 4 hours without inconvenience. That's assertive. Where you're trying not to wound the other person. Their value is very important to you and their worth is very important to you, but you're asserting yourself and being real about the situation. So that's just a quick hop through of his approach. And I'm going to take it off share here and invite your responses.
So this is Christy Horde. First of all, I'm cracking up because this is the conversation today, and I wasn't going to get on this meeting today because I'm still angry about what happened yesterday. Oh my God, I'm like, are you kidding me? Yesterday was one of those days where everything was getting under my skin, and I wish I think I did a lot of flight and some fighting yesterday, and so I'm like, man, talk about timing. So I'm glad I'm not alone. Thank you.
You're not alone. Trust me.
That is so funny. I was like, oh man, I should get on here. It always makes me feel better. I'm still mad about yes. I just want to go home. I don't want to be here. And then here we are talking about the thing. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. Thank you all for being here. And
you are
I'm
most
looking forward to reading more about Augsburger's.
That little book is out of print, but you still can get it on Amazon. I've given copies to Katie and to Frank Logue, my bishop, and to Tom.
All right.
And it's so relevant right now. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was thinking when you were talking about just now describing non-assertive aggressive, does anyone else feel like when you're tired and fatigued, the non-assertive kind of comes out more? I mean, I don't know. I'm sure we all kind of are different, but I feel like when I'm feeling good and energized and excited about what I'm doing, I can try to do the assertive. But when I'm just tired and like I don't want to deal with any more people, it's that fake patience that comes out, and then it just but of course then it lingers because then I'm like afterwards,
I would respond by saying, in part, I think I have a whole section of this discussion which we'll have to say for next week about variables. And one of the variables is gender. I think another variable is race and nationality, your Enneagram profile, your family background, all those variables. You might get into non-assertive compliant when you're tired. When I'm tired, I get aggressive. And that may be a gender difference. It could be a background difference, but there's no one size fits all here.
Yeah.
Believe me. So I'll just tell you a preview. My Enneagram is an 8. and I've had to live into my wings. My 7 wing has saved me once I discovered it, so to speak. So, what I'd like to ask you to do for next week is 2 things, and we still have a few minutes after this. One, if you've not taken the Enneagram next month, consider taking the Enneagram. If you have done it, go back and look at your primary number and look at your 2 wings and how the wings will affect your primary number and actually are factors in how you process and express anger. The second thing I'd ask you to consider is come prepared to share an example of what you would regard as a moment when you handled it well or a moment when you didn't handle it well and what you learned from that.
I think part of this for next session too, David, is how what are those variables, cultural, nationality, race, gender, Enneagram, how are they affecting what's going on internally? And then also, how do they affect the way that you are perceived as a leader, you know, by folks in your congregation, but also by members of your judicatory? I wrestle, I guess, because of the position I'm in as staff officer for church planting, I see this a lot. Church planters who are maybe from a different culture or present differently, being perceived as often angrier, or sometimes, you know, more compliant. So, you know, are people that we can take advantage of. So that I look forward to it. Oh, David, you're muted.
I wanted to share one slide with you that's a quote from Augsburger about a variable, just to whet your appetite for next week. Even though he wrote this in the 70s, he was ahead of the game on so much stuff. All right, here we go. Yeah. Here's this is his quote about gender variables. It is not ladylike, virtuous, or feminine Christian to well, I skipped this, didn't need to do that. To show anger. Thus, for a woman pastor, the taboos are double, perhaps even squared. And then he says, if I can get to the next slide here. All right. Hold on a sec.
Wow.
There we go. Yeah, her reasons for anger, centuries of Christian tradition supporting abusive dominance, and millennia of male-defined theology are even greater. So, just one example of difference and expectations in your context.
David, thank you. We probably need to wrap it up here.
Yeah, we do.
So the assignment, and of course I'll put this in our, you know, our monthly updates.
Okay.
If you've never taken Enneagram, find a free quiz or free test or something online and just maybe, you know, think about that for a bit. Maybe think about some of the variables in your context, and we'll be back third Thursday of March to continue this conversation.
Yeah, I took mine online free and downloaded the PDF. And when I read it, I felt like, damn, they've been reading my journal.
And then just a few more things for you before we sign off. Many folks are wondering about New Episcopal Community Grants. I can tell you that the ball is like rolling on that.
Good.
Haven't announced it yet, but the ball is now rolling. It's not as a standstill anymore. So yay. Keep up with our newsletter, Facebook page, publicity announcements and that kind of thing, or just send me an email when you think about it and ask if I know anything more. And then the other thing, some of you may already be on Mighty Networks. I know Gathering of Leaders uses it for conversation, connection, announcements, sharing of links, sharing of resources, that kind of stuff. New Episcopal Communities is going to try to start using Mighty Networks rather than Facebook. Our primary platform for that kind of conversation is just more inclusive of folks that do not want to be on social media, or maybe you're taking a social media fast over Lent.
Right.
we're just sick and tired of it. So I put the link into the chat box. I think if you click on it, I think you have to create a little persona on their account, and then I'll put grant information on it. There's my poll for joining the Mighty Network.
Thank you. And I put my email and cell phone number in there if you want to have a follow-up conversation. And Katie, can you linger for a few minutes, or do you have to sign off?
I can. And thanks, Janae, for putting the fee-based, the actual good assessment of any grant.
Yes, thank you. So we'll hang around after if you want to hang on and have an after conversation. Feel free to do that. I'd like to close with an old Celtic blessing that has sustained me and kept me going. Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Deep peace of the running wave to you. Deep peace of the flowing air to you. Deep peace of the quiet earth to you. Deep peace of the shining stars to you. Deep peace of the Son of Peace, forever we pray. Amen.
Amen.